Broccolis with Hats, Part 7. Part 2 of Patricide and Other Fun Family Outings, by Cheerios. Read by My Lost and Found. Summary. Dad! A startled, disgusted tone entered the field. Both All Might and All for One blinked. Silence rang across the tension-filled battle. They turned in unison. My boy? Son? They paused, glaring questioningly at each other. Son? All Might whispered. Your boy? All for One bit out vehemently. For a moment, it felt like time was suspended in the glow of those acid green eyes. Kirishima spluttered as the smoke entered his lungs on a sharp inhale. They could hear the rasp of Shigaraki's voice, though they couldn't quite hear what was being said over the beating of their hearts in the alleyway that somehow remained relatively untouched by the destruction. Well, relatively untouched in their imaginations, that is. When Ida raised a trembling chin, he realized that everything from a foot above their heads had been demolished. The building their backs were pressed to was gone. Wires and other bits and bolts clattered to the ground. The spark of the other electrical items, not yet having been turned off, had set off sparks that ignited smoldering flames in the world around them. Yaoyorozu had to press a shaking hand to her mouth to suppress her reflexive whimper. She could hardly be embarrassed when she noticed Todoroki having done the same thing seconds before. A hand met hers, and grasping onto it, shifting in and out of hardness even as she clutched it like a grounding force. Sweat poured down their faces, but on Todoroki's right, Midoriya had oddly not flinched in a long while like the rest of them. Midoriya? Todoroki's eyes dilated in terror beyond Shigaraki and the villains. Where was Midoriya? Todoroki shaking his hand. Where was his wig? He'd been wearing it only moments ago. Tentatively slowed, reached and tapped Ida's. Ida jerked in shock, then robotically turned his head to Todoroki's. Where's Midoriya? Todoroki hissed in the crackle of the broken cluster of buildings. Ida paled. He was right next to you, right? What's going on? Kirishima's stiff voice asked quietly, almost too quiet to be heard. Yaoyorozu's hum entered the conversation, too terrified to truly speak. Midoriya. What about Midoriya? Yaoyorozu finally bit out, sharp and small. He's missing. As one, they lifted their heads to look back on the scene, scanning desperately for Midoriya with a fear of Shigaraki haunting their movements. But Shigaraki wasn't there. The rasp had come from a grind of rubble, the only voice echoing in the pure destruction sourced from a man who was floating still above it all. His dark suit and creepy mask gazed upon the ruin apathetically. But while they couldn't hear his words, they did hear the shift in the atmosphere as footsteps fell on the ground. A helicopter distantly could be heard fluttering over. While the four couldn't quite say how they knew, after all, the smoke was too heavy to really see what was happening. They all knew Midoriya was there. What do we do? Todoroki hissed. Ida, Yaoyorozu, and Kirishima all gasped at him at once. We run! But Midoriya... Yaoyorozu's eyes teared a bit as the smoke irritated her eyes. The panic built in her. Todoroki, there's nothing we can do. That man is too powerful. Kirishima nodded, though he looked pained to agree. They didn't hear Bakugo enter the fray. If they had, perhaps they would have prepared even a fraction more for what was about to occur. Midoriya had never intended to wait to rescue his childhood friend, after all. Despite their disagreement, at once their hearts dropped in unison when the first clear utterings entered the sounds of ruin. "You're here after all, aren't you?" Ida grimaced. Midoriya. He had to mean Midoriya. Who else? The air audibly moved as an impact came shattering into the rubble of Kamino. "I'll have you return everything," All Might declared boldly as his fist made contact with the villain. "All for one?" There was a moment where the earth quaked under the force of the punch. The wind blew them back and nearly toppled the small group. Bakugo, unseen still by the group, clutched at the ground. In a single blow, he thought, his eyes darting across the rubble. He hissed at the smoke in his eyes, batting away the rest. Then, when a second, delayed, gust of wind had him ramming his head back into a chunk of building, his mind went a little hazy. For a second, he thought he saw fucking Deku walk in front of him with those shitty red sneakers he always wore. But then again, he also thought he saw a chicken where he knew for a fact Twice was standing. So maybe he'd hit his head a little too hard. "You're a little late, aren't you?" All for One intoned. "The bar is a little more than 5 kilometers from here. You're slowing down." "Dad?" A startled, disgusted voice entered the field. Both All Might and All for One blinked. Silence rang across the tension-filled battle. They turned in unison. "My boy? Son?" They paused, glaring questioningly at each other. "Son?" All Might whispered. "Your boy?" All for One bit out vehemently. All Might sucked his teeth in dismay and looked at Midoriya. My boy, I'm glad you see me as a father figure, but this isn't the time." Because surely his boy hadn't called his enemy Dad of all things. Surely. All for One's non-existent eyebrows raised at All Might. He chuckled spitefully. "Toshinori, I didn't know where you could have possibly misplaced your last few brain cells, but you see, that's my son, not your boy." Despite this exchange happening not too far away from Todoroki, Ida, and Yaoyorozu, it should be noted, while they could see All for One and All Might, they couldn't see Midoriya, nor could they hear the rest of what was being said. Instead, they saw Bakugo clutching his head and squinting around the rubble. They approached him. Bakugo, meanwhile, was having a minor identity crisis while he witnessed All Might and the mass supervillain currently having a custody battle over Deku. Concussion-induced or not, this was fucking weird. And he'd later have a moment of introspection as he tried to dream journal out what kind of internalized parental issues he had to be going on to dream this shit up. All Might coughed a bit. "Excuse me?" All for One snarled. "You see, I would excuse this as a simple mistake, but seeing as you could hardly keep a partner in your bed given you're emaciated." Despite not having visible eyes, he gave the impression of dragging a rueful gaze up and down All Might's bloodied figure. "Condition? I don't understand how you could dare call my darling son your boy." All Might balked. "Right, as if you..." He mimicked the villain's scathing once-over childishly. Could convince some poor woman to have a child with you. I'll have you know, in my youth I was quite... What the fuck? The two of them turned away from their squabbling to look at Midoriya, who had the most disgusted, yet simultaneously traumatized expression on his face. All for One clutched his hands together over his heart girlishly. Ah, yes, Izuku, my darling boy. How have you been? Still friends with Kachan? Midoriya scowled fiercely. Ah, yes, that one. All for One gave the impression that he might have been grinning. All Might huffed. Well, I know for a fact that my boy is friends with more than just young Bakugo. The villain glared. Midoriya's expression only soured. His nose scrunched rather comically. Yeah, no, I'm not doing this right now. He turned and walked off the battlefield, barely lending an ear to listen to the sounds of fighting resuming behind him. Kirishima was worried about Bakugo. Since they'd approached him, weirdly enough he was unguarded. Was the LOV understaffed or something? Bakugo had been muttering something about custody battles and someone calling a dad for one. He needs recovery, girl, Ida muttered. Yaoyorozu agreed. But how should we get him out of here? We still need to find Midoriya. Todoroki perked up from where he was slowly applying a thin layer of ice to a dazed Bakugo's head when he heard footsteps approaching. Hey guys! Midoriya grinned. Still a bit too wide, but not quite the burning acid they'd seen on him before. Despite everyone else, cough, Todoroki, welcoming Midoriya back, Ida was still a bit wary. The feeling only grew when Midoriya's eyes trained back on him. What? Ida asked, though he waved for Kirishima and Yaoyorozu to start grabbing Bakugo to pull him away from the rubble. Kirishima's cheeks were a little more red than usual when he lifted a mumbling, dazed Bakugo bridal style. Midoriya's head tilted. Aren't you gonna say it? Say what, Midoriya? Ida's eye twitched. That, my name, all offended and annoyed. Ida sighed in mild frustration. Let's go. We're leaving, Midoriya. What? Todoroki looked up from where he'd been circling Midoriya, checking him for injuries. We have to get Bakugo to Recovery Girl. Kirishima and Yaoyorozu waved over to them, Kirishima jogging over. We've got him settled if you want to get out of here. Oh, Todoroki murmured. Yaoyorozu and you will be fine on your own, right? Kirishima's eyebrows furrowed. But what about you guys? Midoriya smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile Kirishima had ever seen on Midoriya before. This was a wide, concerning one. We'll be fine. You guys take Kachan while they're distracted. Kirishima wanted to argue, but the battle was starting to get closer to where they were standing. Yaoyorozu was waving him over urgently. He started to step away. If you guys are sure, we'll be back as soon as we've gotten Bakubro help. Ida groaned. We need to go too, he said after Kirishima had gone some distance away. Aw, come on. Midoriya started walking back towards the commotion. We haven't even gotten to the big surprise yet. Todoroki rested a reassuring hand on Midoriya's shoulder. I'm sure it's very unsettling. Ida pursed his lips. Yeah, and crazy. Midoriya pouted. Well, now I don't even want to show you. Well, it's probably gross. Todoroki huffed quietly on Midoriya's behalf. Your attitude is gross. He paused, then looked to Midoriya, who'd been attempting to teach him normal and playful phrases. Did I say it right? Yes, you did. Midoriya smiled brightly and fondly, before his expression turned indignant. "What have I done to deserve this?" he said, now aimed at Ida. "It's everything, Midoriya," Ida bit out. "It's everything you've ever done." The smoke was beginning to clear up as they approached, though it was still too thick for the cameras to catch much more than All Might and All for One. Midoriya took that moment to absent-mindedly stab twice as they continued walking. "Everything? What about the time I threw you a surprise party?" "It wasn't my birthday, and you killed 12 people!" Midoriya huffed. "They were trying to attack everyone." "All you do is kill people, Midoriya." Ida dragged a soothing hand over his face, but it did little against his headache. "That's like saying All Might did was punch things." "He did, actually." All for One cut in as he and All Might reached a short stalemate. Ida and Todoroki stared, unblinking, at the supervillain. "Like my face and my expensive new car, my lair?" All for One appeared to get angrier as the list went on. With a sudden reaffirmation of his anger, he leapt on All Might again. "Right." Todoroki's mouth parted in confusion. Suddenly, as the battle reached its climax, the earth trembled once more. A roar was heard over the sounds of the battle. Screams, though confused and slightly underwhelming, rang through the air as the flapping of wings became apparent. Todoroki licked his lips distractedly, mouth suddenly dry in his panic. "Is that the surprise, Midoriya?" Midoriya whistled briefly as All Might and All for One stopped mid-battle to stare back and forth between their boy and the sky. "No." "That looks like a Katsudon dragon," All for One noted, sounding vaguely alarmed but mostly interested. "Did you finish your food, dragon?" Todoroki asked Midoriya. "Maybe." Ida paused for a moment, then sighed defeatedly. "It's horrifying, Midoriya." "Thank you." Midoriya smiled, wiping away a tear of pride. Omake. The Katsudon dragon, though not necessarily doing much to sway the battle to one side or the other, had offered just enough of a distraction for All Might to defeat All for One in one last blow, though this blow had crippled the hero and incited cheers across the bystanders. The cameras had only just turned off in time to avoid catching a woman, clad in a white shirt and pink skirt, storming onto the battle scene. No one protested her entering the field due to her dominating aura, though no one could positively say what had happened. After all, there was no video evidence. Some would say that she, with a thin, unnerving smile, had grabbed the supervillain's ear and begun to drag him off the field. Many heroes would protest and say he'd been taken to jail as soon as the battle completed, though anyone who had truly been there knew that he'd been thoroughly chewed out for hours after the battle's conclusion. Perhaps she'd even demand child support, though that was too ridiculous to be believed. Some might say that the woman bore a strong resemblance to one Midoriya, though no one could really say for sure. "So that's where he gets it from." The Katsudon dragon was taken into the Hero Commission for studying. They didn't find anything suspicious or that they could use, though they were very well stocked in the kitchens for weeks following the incident. Okay, so that's that. There's technically some more in the actual series, but it's like a 45,000 word unfinished kind of thing, and then another 1 out of 5 unfinished kind of thing. So I don't think I'm going to do those now, at least. Maybe I'll get back to them at some point. Probably not, but I hope you guys enjoyed. I I love llamas with hats with a passion, so I was delighted to find broccolis with hats. However long ago it was I first saw it, and I loved it, and I'm so glad I got to make a podfic of it. I hope you all enjoyed. Have a good day. Or night. In that case, go to bed.